Is freely available internet porn and video games driving social isolation? Oh, that's an interesting question. Now, one psychologist seems to think so. Philip Zimbardo, who's a psychologist that was famous for heading up the 1971 Stanford prison experiment, has written a book called Man Disconnected, where he basically lays out the case that young men's experience with porn and video games is redefining their world and basically causing them to have addiction to both. Interesting. Now, this comes from Raw Story. Young men are experiencing new forms of addiction to pornography and video games, two internet phenomenons that more people than ever are experiencing in social isolation. Stanford psychologist Philip Zimbardo told the BBC that he studied the lives of 20,000 young men and found that their relationship with porn and gaming is redefining how these respondents view the world. Quote, now with freely available pornography, which is unique in history, they're combining playing video games and as a break, watching on average 2 hours of porn a week. Now, he says, in the fact that he delivered a recent TED Talk in which he gave an example of what many young men are thinking. When I'm not at home...
Did he use visual examples for that during his TED Talk?
That I do not know.
That might have been an X-rated TED Talk.
Might have been. Might have been interesting, actually.
Yeah.
He says, so he points out this is an example of what young men are thinking from his TED Talk. When I'm in class, I wish I was playing World of Warcraft. When I'm with a girl, I'll wish that I was watching porn because I'll never get rejected. Wow, that sounds really sad.
Yeah, I mean, that first one, I can sure, I get it. Sometimes you're in class, you wish you were playing video games. I think a lot of people have been there. When you're with a partner and you wish you were watching porn instead, that's strange.
Yeah,
I mean,
that seems
I
off.
think that's weird. That seems off.
Yeah.
Unless you wish you were watching porn with that partner,
which is definitely, I think, great and common.
That's great, and you know, I mean, depending on where you're at, that might increase your chances. So I can see that. But if you're like, you know, in a situation and things are getting like, hey, something exciting might happen here, and you wish you were just at home in front of your computer watching some pornography, that's a problem.
And that's what he says is a problem. He says that in his book, he warns that boys who grow up in an environment where they can watch adult films and shut off the world for hours at a time in video games are having their brains digitally rewired. And what he calls for is more parental awareness and more sex education that emphasizes close romantic relationships as well as physical contact. Now, for my part in this, I'm a gamer, but I definitely support what he's trying to do to offset that. Emphasize close relationships, more sex ed. We're all in favor of that. At least I would hope that we are. But as far as his conclusions about video games, I don't know. Were there some times where I'm in class, in college, like, I would rather be home, or I can't wait to get home and play video games. Yeah. Absolutely. Because sometimes class is boring. And then sometimes class is awesome. And I don't feel that way. But when I'm with a woman, there is never any time where I was like, I wish I was watching porn.
Me neither. Yeah, that's never happened. Even if it was like, and, granted, I have not been on a first date in over 8 years. So, I'm going back in the memory bank here. But even if it was like, we went on a date and, maybe I was hoping that it would get more physical than it did. Maybe it was like, we just had a kiss and it was like, or maybe, she wasn't interested, whatever. I still never remember being in a situation where it's like, well, I wish I was just watching porn because I wouldn't have to try as hard there. All I need is a good internet connection for that. I just wish I had my hand lotion and I don't think I've ever been in that situation. And I think I'd be worried if I ever was. Like, I'd be like, what's wrong with me?
And, the problem with this, and I'm not even sure if I'm interpreting this correctly, but I think he's trying to paint a picture that a lot of our youth are like this. No, I don't think so. I don't agree, especially in my case. But I think that there are certainly some instances where people do get addicted to both pornography and video games. I mean, you do hear those stories out of like South Korea, right, where people will sit there and die after a 72-hour League of Legends marathon. Mm-hmm. That's internet addiction. That's video game addiction for sure. Definitely not porn addiction, but video game addiction. So it does happen, and we're not trying to minimize that. But I don't think that trying to paint everybody who's younger and say that this is exactly what's happening to most boys, I don't think that's correct. And maybe, as I said, maybe I'm interpreting this study wrong.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, because I think that, I look back, and if everybody that got into the gaming culture developed in this, quote, addiction and this dependency, I think half of the people I know would not have finished college, even. They would have had to have dropped out. And that was not the case. That was not, nor would they have ever left their dorm rooms on Friday and Saturday nights or whatever. And again, that was also not the case. I have some friends where on occasion they'd be like, we're going to have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, because you're more into this stuff than I am. They would do like a LAN party or whatever where they would game. Okay, so I called it the right thing. Yep. All right. I had some friends that would occasionally do that on a Friday night where it was like, hey, it's just we're just going to lay low tonight. It's just a chill night in. We're going to have a LAN party. But how is that
college? Back in college, we had a rec room, a computer room, right? And it was basically, you had a lot of computers and you had a lot of video game systems. And every once in a while, we would hold this on a weekend. We would hold something called a lock-in, where we would bring computers, we would bring our video game systems into the rec room, and we'd stay up and have an all-night gaming session, doing all sorts of different games, all sorts of different systems, contests, have food, pizza and everything like that. And those were some of the more fun times that I've had in college.
All right, so file this under news that should shock nobody. Jeff was a nerd in college, but it's not like that.
True.
But and it's not like that was every single weekend for you. You know, it's not like that was like now if you were doing that 7 nights a week, and if you were just blowing off class to do that all the time, then yeah, you would have had an issue. That would be an issue. That would be. So I think it's just like anything else, I mean, there are people that just sort of, don't know when to turn it off. And in this case, in the literal sense, don't know when to, push the power button.
Right.
But yeah, I think to kind of, have the brushstroke where it's like, this is happening to an entire generation. Yeah, I don't know if I'd go that far either. But maybe he's kind of foreshadowing, like maybe it's worse now than it was when you and I were in college, which it very well may be. I don't know.
And well, there's one more thing too that I want to address to this before we wrap it up, and that's how he says this is 2 factors that are increasing social isolation. Now, the porn angle, sure, you don't sit there and have a porn party with your friends. I mean,
well, speak for yourself, Jeff, but that's fine.
I guess I'm sure. I've never been to one.
Just don't generalize, all right?
I'm not.
No, I never have either, but some people do.
But when it comes to video games, well, what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of video games now are based online, on the internet, where you're playing with people, and that's actually involves a large amount of teamwork, especially to be successful in these games. A lot of games have a grouping mechanic where you get better rewards when you work with other gamers, when you work with other people. And there are systems set up like Ventrilo, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. And other mic systems, basically, where you can talk to each other in real time, using a mic and headset, and you can plan your strategies. A lot of gamers tend to become friends, so there is social interaction. So how people can say that video games are being socially isolated or leading to social isolation, in this age where every system is connected to the internet, I just don't see how that you can come to that conclusion.
Oh, I mean, see, I'll just have to take your word for that, because I don't. Yeah, I mean, you're into that stuff, and I'm just not.
Right.
But I think that if you look at it from the broader point, this guy has the same point that has been made in many different ways, many different times. Given our increase in technology, the whole face-to-face interaction thing is not quite what it was. And I do think that's true. I mean, I notice that you see less pickup games on the street, for instance, than I think went on when we were kids, because we didn't have the internet and stuff like that. So I do think that there's some truth in that, but I don't think you can just point at gaming or just point at porn. I think it's just the internet in general, the technology we have in general. It's not as common for as much face-to-face interaction. Do I think that that's a problem to a degree? Yeah, I kind of do. I mean, I think that, you know, like I said, I don't see kids playing pickup games the way that they used to when we were kids. It's not as common for kids to go run around outside as much. Instead, they're on YouTube all the time, or they're on Facebook, and then there's these cyberbullying issues. So I do think there's some of that going on, but the technology is not going anywhere. So you just have to kind of adapt and roll with it. But to just point at video games or just point at porn, you know, I would say that's a bit of a broad brushstroke.
Yeah, I would have to agree with, don't broad brush. I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't understand. If you're not part of the gaming scene, there's a lot of stuff that you don't understand. And that's alright, and that's why we're here to enlighten you.
But nonetheless, though, I still would be intrigued to see this TED Talk, because, I mean, Philip Zimbardo has done some really interesting stuff. I would
the
be curious
Stanford
to see.
experiment with the prisoners. That was amazing work.
Yeah.
And so
this guy
is a smart guy, and
Oh, yeah.
generally, I mean, when he does an experiment, he does his homework. So, as I said, that's why I throw out the caveat that I might be misinterpreting the study.
Well, I don't know if misinterpreting, but maybe it's like, you know, we're just summarizing it based off this article. We would have to really dive into his data, because I'm sure he made a very interesting and compelling case that probably has some great points. And maybe, you know, if it's a Sanford thing, maybe the overarching theme wasn't necessarily like, oh, look at this generation, they're so sad. Maybe this was more of a warning to say, okay, we have this technology, it's not going anywhere, you know, but let's try to be responsible, you know, similar to like a Nicholas Carr approach in The Shallows. You know, it's not saying like, this is bad and you're dumb now. This is saying, hey, this is here, things are changing, things are different. Let's not go down the darkest path.